Welcome to all. Welcome Rahul bhai. Please proceed
Yes,
further.
welcome to all of you. Myself Rahul Tirgar, behalf of ISRE Ahmedabad chapter. Mr. B. Gautam Baliga is a graduate mechanical engineer from IIT Kharagpur and has worked with Voltas Limited for 8 years. Gautam Baliga is director at Opal HVAC Engineer Private Limited, Mumbai, a company which specializes in HVAC systems for healthcare, pharmaceuticals, food, and industrial HVAC systems. He is also a partner with RS Kulkarni HVACR Engineers Pune, which offers consultancy for HVACR works related to pharmaceuticals, commercial facilities. He is an active member of ISRE, in which he has been on the editorial board of the ISRE Air Conditioning and Refrigeration Journal. He is the chair for the Healthcare Technical Group, which is tasked to bring out a healthcare guide for HVAC for healthcare spaces by this year. Gautam Baliga sir is on the panel of ISRE DL and lectures on pharmaceuticals, healthcare, and IAQ. Uh, yes, sir. Please start webinar.
Okay, let me share my screen once again. You can see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening to the organizers, and thank you very much for inviting me for this lecture on infection control methods in air conditioning of healthcare facilities. Air conditioning in hospitals can be a double-edged sword. If well designed, it can lead to comfort and well-being of the patient, healthcare workers, and the visitors. If it is poorly designed, it becomes a proliferator of disease. It can adversely affect the patient outcomes. You get admitted for one disease and you come out with another disease. And that is not very uncommon. So with this little background, let me start my lecture. In medical facilities, relatively high levels of pathogenic, that is disease-causing microorganisms are generated and are concentrated by infected patients or by procedures which handle infected tissues or fluids. Surgical operations on large scale in big hospitals heightens the danger of cross-contamination between patients, hospital staff, and visitors. Then antibiotics are for protecting patients. Over time, some of the antibiotic resistant microorganisms start colonizing the hospitals. Patients not carrying such microorganism have a high risk of infection during hospital stay. If you have heard of MRSA, that is called methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus, that is a particular bacteria which is very common in hospitals, and other such bacteria, they are a great concern for hospitals, because once a patient gets affected by MRSA, there is almost very little way of treating that particular patient. It is as bad as that. Pathogens are spread by contact and to some extent by non-contact causes such as airborne causes. HVAC system has to be a tool to control the airborne infection. Many medical facilities include processes in which chemical fumes, aerosols, harmful gases, nuclear medicine is used. In such applications, HVAC systems operate in conjunction with primary containment equipment to contain, exhaust, or dilute the contaminant. What is containment? It means by means of pressure or by means of some barriers, you don't allow the harmful gases to go out of that particular area. We'll touch on the indoor air quality in healthcare facilities. There are toxic chemicals in the air, then there are pathogens in the air, and we'll talk first about the toxic chemicals in the air. We have got what is called the glutaraldehydes, nitrous oxide, latex allergens. We'll talk a little bit about what these are. Glutaraldehyde is used as a cold sterilant to disinfect and clean heat-sensitive medical, surgical, and dental equipment which cannot be heat sterilized. You know, when you cannot put it to a sterilizer, which is the safest way, there are some PVC tubes and also sorts of things that you can't put in a sterilizer. You have to use these chemicals to do the cold sterilization. So they give out some fumes as a tissue fixative in histology and pathological labs in the preparation of grafts and bioprosthesis in various chemical applications. These glutaraldehydes are used. So there are certain exposure limits, short term, it has got some severe problems with the breathing, and long term, it has got even more severe problems. So glutaraldehydes, you have to have that, certain amount of ventilation, that is fresh air in the air conditioning system, to avoid the buildup of these kind of toxic chemicals. Then we have got nitrous oxide. It is also called laughing gas. It is basically used in, anesthesia. Nitrous oxide can be used to treat pain. It is also used as a mild sedative. It is used before dental procedures, mostly even today. And excessive sweating, shivering, nausea, all these things are the result of nitrous oxide. Operation theaters are particularly subject to these kind of gases. So buildup can be only avoided when you have got adequate ventilation, that is fresh air. Then you've got latex allergens, which come from the surgical gloves, catheters. You might have seen that powdery thing which is there in the gloves and all that. That is the latex allergens, and some people are very allergic to it. Latex allergy, the skin mucous membranes react when latex touches them. A severe latex allergy can lead to breathing and other such problems. Healthcare workers should practice effective source control in order to minimize the airborne latex allergen pollution emission while they are doing that, wearing of these kind of gloves and all. Then we have got the airborne pathogens, that is your TB bacteria, Legionella bacteria, Staphylococcus aureus, and Aspergillus spores. A little bit more about these things. Pathogenic bacteria in hospitals are mostly with diameters 1 to 5 micron and can be suspended in the air for a very long time, enabling the disease to be transmitted. So this is one aspect. Then TB bacteria, when an active TB patient coughs, sneezes, or speaks, airborne TB droplets will be generated. These droplets contain the multi-drug resistant Mycobacterium bacteria, which is highly contagious. Then we have got the Legionnaires disease, which is a form of pneumonia caused by Legionella bacteria, typically found in lakes, streams, then water fountains and moist spaces. Where is the moist space in hospital? Near cooling towers and all that. It thrives in temperatures between 25 to 45 degrees centigrade and an optimum temperature of 35 C. The disease is contracted by breathing mist coming out of such places. It can be led into the air-conditioned spaces through fresh air, which gets inducted from near the cooling towers. So if you're not very careful where the fresh air is coming for your, AHUs, and it is coming from near the cooling towers, there is a very good possibility that you might get in the Legionella bacteria. Time, it can be quite severe disease that can be caused. Between exposure and symptoms, it is 2 to 10 days, and there have been cases where it can lead to death. So 5 to 30% is the death rate without treatment. When you don't identify that the guy has got Legionella bacteria and it goes away just like that, there is a chance of death. Then you've got the Staphylococcus aureus. The bacteria are present on the skin and in the nose, blood, and urine of the infected patient during some surgical procedures that require the use of power tools, such as oscillating bone saws and bone drills, especially in the orthopedic operations. Microbial or aerosols may be generated. MRSA is the other one. It is particularly difficult to treat as it is resistant to most of the antibiotics. Then we have got Aspergillus spores. Where does it come from? So, hospital renovation or nearby construction work are major sources of aerosolized Aspergillus spores. The fungal spores from soil, plants, animals, and dust particles that attach to the clothing of the healthcare workers, and these people go all over the hospital. This is a source for Aspergillus spores. So you can see that there are so many sources through which you can get infection in a hospital. So I'm going to talk in terms of these broad headings: introduction, filtration, air changes, pressure gradient, humidity, temperature, and fresh air and exhaust. These are the basic means by which the air conditioning engineer tries to control the contamination. And of course, now we have got the UVC irradiation. That also I'll touch upon how we use it in the HVAC systems. So how the human body is affected by airborne contamination is, it is essentially through this, what goes through your nose. So you can see that you've got the upper respiratory tract, and then you've got the lower respiratory tract, and all that you breathe goes deep inside, and see what happens. The normal body has excellent protection systems to prevent respiratory infection. So there are several layers of filtration. You've got the mouth and windpipe. These are moist surfaces, mucus, to attract and collect particles. Then you've got the trachea, which is going a little lower, then bronchi, a little lower. Alveoli is even lower. So that is all coming under the lower respiratory system. Infections such as pneumonia affect the lungs, where they can thrive and enter the bloodstream if they manage to penetrate the body's defense system. That means if your respiratory system, all these trachea, bronchi, and alveoli is not able to catch these kind of particles, and these ultimately get into your bloodstream, it can result in pneumonia. In this particular diagram, you can see you can see at the bottom, you've got nose, then the upper pharynx bronchi, then bronchioles and alveoli. How each part of your respiratory system is able to take care of 20 micron, 6 micron, 2 micron, and 0.6 micron filters. So you can see that, the various, as you go down and down, that is towards your alveoli, the 0.6 micron have got, it has got greater catching power for the smaller and smaller particles. But once the particles become very, very fine, even your, respiratory system is not able to take care of those particles, and they tend to go into your bloodstream. Airborne particles can be toxic, allergens, or infectious agents. These particles may enter the building from outside or from processes inside the building. Means it could be other patients, something like that. Outdoor air can contain fumes from vehicles and diesel generators. Rural areas can have pesticides or agricultural dust. Building finishes can emit hazardous dust. Exhalations from patients can be a source of hazardous infectious agent. This is one of the most important sources of infection that you have to be aware of, especially the outpatient department. You don't even know who has entered that hospital before even he is admitted, and you might be interacting with those patients. Now, in contamination control, this is the way the contamination pathway is. You've got the source, you've got a transmission mechanism to reach the susceptible site, then you've got the contact with the susceptible site, and then the retention at the susceptible site. So when you break this particular path at any stage, you are able to break the possibility of contamination. Infectious agent is the microorganism that can cause the infection or the disease. Then the infectious agent can be transmitted by tiny droplet nuclei, that is less than 5 micrometers, that is microns, containing microorganisms, example measles, tuberculosis, etc., that remain suspended in the air for a long time and can be carried over large distances by air current. So it's not that only the next bed is affected. If you've got a ward, there might be many beds that can be affected by any such patient. The place of entry into the susceptible host is the mucous membrane. That is, it can be the eyes, nose, mouth, or the respiratory tract. Surgical site infection, operation theaters are among the most critical areas for infection control. Here the patients are open to surrounding environment while in an immunosuppressed condition. What is immunosuppressed condition? Because when they are being operated, they are given certain types of drugs to make them immunosuppressed. That means they've got immunity. I mean, they don't have any immunity that time, so that they can accept, let's say, some particular type of drug. Otherwise, the body rejects that particular drug, or they can take a particular, limb or some, part that you want to get into that particular into the patient. Otherwise, the body rejects it. So the he is made immunosuppressed purposely. And when it is immunosuppressed, then that patient can take any other disease also. So it is very critical that in operation theaters, it is disease-free. Procedurally, staff and patients wear face masks, fully covered gowns and gloves or even fully ventilated suits for procedures on high-risk contagious patients. So if you see this particular diagram, there are so many routes for a surgical infection. You've got the adjacent area, that is the immediate outside area, then the floor, then the operating room personnel, then the instruments are there, patient's skin is there. You've got an incision, the skin adjacent to that incision, that might be having certain contagion for whatever reasons. Then you've got the operating room air. So this diagram, it shows many ways in which this is interacting. The adjacent room, if it is not that clean, people are walking into the operation theater. So that is a source of worry. So the dirty adjacent area and uncleaned floor from previous operation also can be a problem. Then you've got the instruments getting contaminated on the way from CSSD. CSSD is the Central Sterile Stores Department to the operation theater. Then the patient's skin. The patient's skin near the incision, as I told you, cleaning the floor, proper gowning of surgeons, nurses contribute to successful surgical outcomes. And the second thing is, if you remember the earlier slide, the shorter the operation, less the chance of infection. If you have got like this is the infection equation. Infectivity is the ability of the organism to enter and survive and multiply in a host. Infectiousness indicates the ease with which the disease is transmitted to the other hosts. Infection occurs when there is an infectious agent in a source, a susceptible host, and most critically, a way for the agent to be transmitted from the source to the host. This is the infection equation, that dose into site, into virulence, into time, divided by level of host defense. This is the chance of infection. So if you see this equation, dose is the amount of pathogen that gets transferred from the infection into the infection site. Site is the location of the site. The site could be respiratory organ or some other, less critical site, like it can be an operation on your hand or your leg. It may not result in that kind of a chance of infection as it might be in the case of respiratory organ. Then the virulence, some infections are far more potent than others. You know that you can compare COVID-19 versus common cold. You know that virulence is quite different. Then time is the time one is exposed to the pathogen. So if you've got an operation which goes on for hours together, the chance of infection becomes that much more. Then the denominator is level of the host defense. If the host defense is very good, the chance of infection is less. But if the host defense is very less, the chance infection is more. But invariably, you'll find the host defense is purposely made less because of these, immunosuppressing agents that are administered to the patient. Now we come to filtration. Requirements of filtration are this. You've got the viruses, which are 0.01 micron to 0.05 micron, bacteria 0.05 to 5 micron, fungal spores, yeast 1 micron to 100 micron, and then you've got pollen grain 10 micron to 400 micron. Viruses and bacteria normally occur in colonies or on larger particles. Microorganisms are easily collected by filtration, but microorganisms can multiply in the filter, releasing dead or living byproduct. So what here we are trying to tell is that, all these, the sizes that are mentioned by itself, they can be tackled with filtration. But even there is a limitation. The limitation is that, there is something called a filtration efficiency, and that whatever that filter is there, it will start releasing certain amount of, all these things, these pathogens. So you have to have a method by which it's not just captured. After some time, it has to be cleaned and got rid of. So that is the other aspect. MER14 removes 75 to 85% of the particles in the range of 0.3 to 1 micron. Standard 170 2017. Now, of course, this is dated. Now, the 21 has also come. Gives efficiencies of filtration together with pre-filters for the various different areas. HEPA filters, earlier listed as MER17, are often specified for PE rooms, bone marrow, organ transplant patient rooms, and super specialty operation theaters. This is where the HEPA filters are used. In most of the critical areas, it is enough to use MER14, which I told you is 75 to 85%. For 0.3 to 1 micron, you don't use HEPA filters everywhere. And other areas, less critical areas, you can do with MER8 and things like that. We'll come to that. HEPA filters, the HEPA filter efficiencies are based on MPPS. MPPS stands for most penetrating particle size. For this particle size, the filter exhibits its lowest filtration efficiency. That means when we say that 99.99% to 0.3 micron, the particles which are immediately, little smaller than that and bigger than that, the efficiency is in fact a little bit higher than that 99.99. Get this particular thing in your mind. So just try to correlate it to this COVID virus, because that is what affects us day in and day out these days. Most viruses, including this CoV2, range from 0.0004, that is, 0.004 micron to 1 micron. And we are talking of 0.3 micron in your HEPA. However, viruses are rarely observed as individual particles. This is something you have to keep in mind. But instead, they are expelled from the body already combined with water, proteins, salts, and other components as large droplets and aerosols. Thus far, SARS-CoV-2 has been observed in aerosolized particles in a spectrum of sizes from 0.25 to 0.5 micron. Necessary, with this, the use of HEPA filter is considered quite adequate to take care of this virus, even the COVID SARS-2. Now, in this particular standard, just remember that 2017 is now 2021, but these charts are the same. So these are still valid. So for the various areas, they have given what should be the filtration level, what is considered adequate. If you see, you've got this class B, class C surgery, inpatient, ambulatory, diagnostic, therapeutic radiology, and so on. You have to have MO 7 plus MO 14. Then you've got the various other rooms. You go through this particular standard, you'll find that each room has been identified and what should be the filtration level in each one of these rooms. And of course, you are most welcome to put anything better than this, but this is considered to be the minimum that you should use in these particular areas. Then the other point is that filtration of outdoor air and exhaust air. It is recommended to use MO 13 or better grade of filtration for outdoor air. The exhaust air must be protected for containment by at least MO 10 grade filters. You can't just throw exhaust air directly outside. That's another important point. Then hygienic criteria for filtration, it is recommended to use at least 2 stages of filtration. One filter stage should be installed prior to the cooling coil, and second filter stage should be installed downstream of the fan to avoid contaminants from the fan and its maintenance. So typically you will find like this. You've got a mixing box, then you've got a filter bank, which is the pre-filter, then cooling coil, then heating coil, then the blower, and then the bank number 2. Air change rate and dilution. Air change rate represents the number of times the entire volume of air is replaced each hour. Most air conditioning engineers are quite familiar with this particular terminology. One of the methods to reduce the exposure of the person to concentration of toxic chemicals and the number of microbes is by providing ventilation, which is introducing fresh air into the area and is expressed in terms of air changes per hour. We talked earlier about those triglycerides and all those things, glutaraldehydes and all those things. And those chemicals, what is the way in which you can remove? By dilution. It is the fresh air that can dilute it. If you are recirculating the same air, it can't be diluted. So that fresh air becomes a very important thing. Certain quantity of air is recirculated in the space through the air filtration system of the air handling unit. The number of times the air gets churned through the filtration system results in more of the particulate matter and microbes getting filtered out. So you've got, one is toxic agents, which only fresh air can help you, because those toxic agents, if they are gases, filter is not going to help you. It's only the fresh air. And the other is, the filters that take care of the, particulates, whether it is pathogens or other particles, that can be only taken care of by the filtration system. More number of air changes, better is the filtration. So you've got this particular thing, effect of air change rates on particulate removal. On the left side, we have got 2 air change per hour, right up to 50 air change per hour. Time required for removal, efficiency of 99% in minutes. If it is 2 air changes, it takes 138 minutes. 12 air changes, it is 23 minutes. 50 air changes, it is 6 minutes. The rightmost column, it says what is the time required for 99.9% efficiency of removal. So it takes a lot more time for that kind of a efficiency. Then we have got, for various areas in this standard, it is mentioned class B and C rooms. What are class B and C rooms? These are classified by whether that patient is being administered local anesthesia or full body anesthesia. Okay. If it is local anesthesia, it is class B. Full body anesthesia is class C. Operating stroke surgical cystographic rooms, delivery rooms, you've got for each and every room, what is the temperature, pressure, outside air, air changes, recirculatory, that is recommended. Similarly, if you go through this particular, there is no area that they are not covered in that particular standard. Okay, so we come to the next part, that is the pressure gradient. Why pressurization? We always say that this area has to be pressurized. Why you need pressurization? When a patient has to be protected from airborne contamination coming in from adjoining spaces, the room is kept at a higher pressure, that is positive pressure with respect to the surroundings. So air exfiltrates from the room. You can see this room. If the particular room is to be protected from outside, it is kept under positive pressure. So air will only go out, not come in. When the adjoining spaces need to be protected from potent drugs, nuclear medicine, or patients with airborne infectious diseases, the room has to be contained. That means the room air should not go out. Outside air can come in. The room is kept at negative pressure. So here you will find that air can only come in, not go out. So in today's context, COVID patients are kept at a negative pressure, for example. The convention is to have differential pressure to be at least 2.5 pascals. That means when we say there is a pressure difference, it should be measured at least 2.5 pascals. The pressure differentials recommended for isolation rooms are as follows. Protective isolation room, that is your positive isolation room, it has to be 2.5 pascals, ideally more than 8 pascals. That's the recommendation from CDC. Airborne infectious isolation room, that means these are the rooms, just like these are, for example, COVID patients are airborne infectious isolation rooms. They are kept under minus 2.5 pascals. A pressure differential of 2.5 pascals is recommended by NABH for operation theaters also, but such low differential pressures are difficult to monitor. So it is when you're a designer and you want to design, you better design at something like 8 pascals, so that you are not really getting to, any problems with measuring instrument and you don't know it is showing 2.5, but because of your error in the instrument, you might actually not be on the negative side when you're trying for positive 2.5, or it is not positive 2.5 when it is, the other way around. So if you want to be clear that you're not entering into the other zone, better keep it far away from 2.5. You keep it at something like 8 pascals. So now pressure gradient rationale is like this. The cleanest area is kept at the highest pressure. So from there it exfiltrates to the clean areas, then to general area, then the dirty area, and from there it goes out. So if you see for example, a OT suit, you'll find that you've got the operation, the store. First is the store, where they keep all those, the instruments that come from the CSSD, the Central Sterile Store Department. That is the cleanest. You don't want the operation theater instruments to be having any contamination. So that is at the highest pressure. Then the operation theater is at 15 pascals. Then the scrub is where they clean the foot and all that. That is at 0 pascals. That's a dirty area. Then you've got the clean corridor, which is at 7.5. Then there is a gray corridor. Then there is a doctor's lounge, doctor's changing room, and then the toilet block. You can see that progressively the air is moving outwards towards the toilets and the changing rooms. The norm is minimum 2.5 pascals difference for operation theaters. As I told you, it is better to design it for 8 pascals. Humidity. This is something that this graph shows the effect of relative humidity on mice infected with influenza broths. This was an experiment that was carried out. From 20 to 40%, you will see that when the exposure to RH of 20 to 40%, you will find that the fatality rate of that mice who have been exposed to the influenza broth, it is almost 100%. Then 40 to 60%, the fatality rate is much, much lower. You can see that mortality rate has dropped to 20%. Then from 60 to 80%, again, the mortality rate is going up. So what this chart shows, it is not just this chart. So many studies are there that it is the 40 to 60% range that is ideal for well-being of people. So that is why it is recommended that, you should have 40 to 60% in hospitals. The upper respiratory tracts produces mucus that traps particles before they can be pulled into the vulnerable lungs. When the air is dry, just imagine going to a very dry place, for example, Jaipur in summer, your mucus will dry up. And what happens, we showed one chart that your, your bronchus and all that is catching your particles. What happens when those things become dry? They don't catch any particles, correct? So the efficiency of your respiratory filtration system goes down. That is why humidification is important in hospitals, so that there is, a little bit of mucus in your upper respiratory tract, so that your particles can be trapped. But then if you have on the other side high humidity, hazardous microorganisms need water to grow initially. Many of them survive longer when the air is humid. Dehumidification is thus important in hospital spaces and equally important in HVAC ducts and components. Filters reduce the volume of infectious particles that enter into the breathing space. Okay. Now, just to see these contradictory things, filters reduce the volume of infectious particles that enter the breathing zone. Humidification helps the body resist infectious particles not trapped in the filters. Then dehumidification reduces the number of particles that exist in the first place. So that means you need to be somewhere in between. You should not be having high humidity or low humidity. If you see this particular chart, it is called the Stirling chart, and it is from ASHRAE. You see the thick lines, they represent more growth. The thin lines, as the lines become thin, the growth is less. So if you see bacteria, it is at very low RH, very high growth. As you go towards 40% RH, it is reducing. All those pathogens, the growth reduces as you go towards 40% RH. Again, 60% onwards, towards 100%, the growth is increasing. So the optimum zone for any healthcare facility is considered to be 40 to 60% RH. Rooms where RH exceeds 70% for prolonged periods are likely to experience airborne fungi and house dust mites. Each mold has its special growth characteristics. Once it has started to grow, it is difficult to stop by lowering the humidity, because one of the metabolic products of growth is water, which then allows the growth in drier conditions. That means it is not good enough that, once your RH has been high for a long time and the mold is set in, then if you reduce the RH, it is of no use, because this mold, it will only keep growing. Condensation should be avoided on building surfaces, as this supports mold growth. Humidity criteria for filters and ducts. Filters will protect from dust and microorganisms. Pollutants will accumulate in the filters, and some of them could act as nutrient substrate for microorganisms. That means if you've got dust which is accumulated on the filter, that is where the microorganisms find growth. So that is what it says. At right temperature and humidity, filters can create a suitable environment for growth of microorganisms. For filters, RH more than 80%, microorganisms may cause problems. More than 90% will definitely cause problems in terms of mold growth. The HVAC system should be designed so that relative humidity of air is below 80% with respect to air filters. What does that mean? If you see this particular diagram, you've got the air which is coming in through the mixing air, and then certain amount is going through the cooling coil. There might be bypass, and then it goes like this into the air. So if you see what is the relative humidity of the air which is coming in, it is more towards, let's say you're maintaining the area at 60% RH, then the air here might be around 60% RH. What happens at the cooling coil is that it is at 100, almost 95% RH when it gets discharged, okay, from the cooling coil. So if there is no bypass for the time being you consider, then suppose there is no heating, then along the line, the downstream of the cooling coil and the ducts and all that, that is the supplier ducts, it is all subject to very high RH. Only after being introduced inside the room, the RH might go down because of collecting heat. But inside the duct, the RH is very high. And if you see some of these supplier ducts, it is likely that you will find a lot of mold growth. So what is the way out? So what is done is, suppose you have good 2000 CFM and that is the dehumidified air quantity, you have got zero bypass. Let us say your ADP is 56 Fahrenheit, then the RH downstream will be 95%. Okay. If you take certain amount of bypass, 200, you can get it down to 90%. So similarly, by increasing bypass to certain extent, say you are making it 25% of the bypass, you are able to get it to 85%. So what the point is that you should not have just the dehumidified air going down the, the supplier duct. There has to be certain amount of bypass air so that, you don't have mold formation in the downstream filters, that is this, filter bank 2 and the supplier ducts. Now we come to temperature. The patient's thermal well-being is largely a function of temperature, not the humidity. Then patients in both clinical and inpatient facilities may be very scantily dressed or without clothes, and sometimes for long period of times. If you take, for example, the BMT room, where bone marrow transplant is there, the clothes themselves can be a source of infection. So the doctors tell that you don't wear clothes. So what do you do? If in that room you have got 24, 25, 26 degrees centigrade, that guy won't be able to sleep. He'll be so frozen. So you should have the facility that the temperature can be, raised up. In a variety of diseases or injury, patient metabolism or fever can interfere with the body's ability to regulate heat. For operation theaters and emergency department, healthcare workers often wear layers of clothing, mostly unpermeable, require temperatures as low as 18 degrees centigrade. So you've got one extreme, sometimes you need higher temperatures, sometimes very low temperatures. So be aware that, the guidebooks tells you, in which area, what is the recommended temperature. Fresh air and exhaust. Outdoor air intakes for the AHU shall be located 25 feet away from the cooling tower. We talked about Legionnaires' disease and all exhaust and vent discharges. Outdoor air intakes from near cooling towers, water fountains may lead to Legionnaires' disease. Then time between exposure and symptoms is 2 days. And this we talked about actually. Air intakes are accumulating sites for dirt and debris, including rotting botanical materials such as leaves, which are growth sites for fungi such as Aspergillus fumigatus. Outdoor air intakes. Actually, this happens especially when you've got intake louvers and there is no drain from that intake louvers. If you see these intake louvers, it is always full of muck. So well-designed intake louvers which drain out water, that's very important. Outdoor intakes for AHU shall be located at least 6 feet above the grade, that is the, the floor level. Outdoor intakes on top of building shall be at least 3 feet above the roof level. The new facilities with modern to high risk of natural or man-made extraordinary events shall be located with intakes away from public access. All intakes shall be designed to prevent entrainment of wind-driven rain, shall have features to drain away precipitation and have bird screens. This is what we talked about. The intake lowers should have a draining facility. Then recommended practice for exhaust discharges as per ASHRAE 170. This is a special consideration for these kind of room, that is the airborne infection isolation room, bronchoscopy room, emergency department, nuclear medicine labs, radiology waiting, and lab chemical fume exhaust. How do you exhaust them? There's a way to do it. Discharge the exhaust in vertical direction at least 10 feet above the roof level and not less than 10 feet horizontally from air intakes, openable windows, doors, and areas normally accessible to the public or maintenance personnel that are higher level elevation than the exhaust discharge. Discharge be located in such a way that they minimize the recirculation of the exhausted air back into the building. If you see, this is a very small but important tip. You've got a infectious isolation room out here. You've got the exhaust fan here. This part of the duct is a positive, because the blower is here, this is positive. So what happens if the duct is leaking, it gets into the occupied space. So this is a wrong method of doing it. The right method is the entire ducting which is going over other occupied spaces, it has to be under negative pressure. This is the correct method. Then we'll talk a little bit about the UVGI irradiation, the way it is used in healthcare facilities. Nowadays we talk a lot about this. UVGI is ultraviolet radiation used to limit the growth of microorganisms in AHUs. UV light, especially around 265 nanometers, damages the DNA of the microorganism. UVGI from the lamps in AHUs inactivate the microorganism present in the air and on surfaces such as cooling coils and drain pans. So, little more about UVGI. UVGI, it is used to limit the microorganisms, and it has to be in the range of 265 nanometers. That is what we are talking of. That is the best. And what you get normally is 254 and 254 nanometers. That is the mid-range. Even that is considered to be very good. UVGI from the lamps inactivate the microorganisms. And if you see the cooling coils and the drain pans, they are normally, very slimy to touch. That is because of all these microorganisms that are getting accumulated there. So those get destroyed. Vegetative bacteria such as microbacteria and viruses are very susceptible to UVGI. Only fungal spores and bacterial spores are less susceptible. So vegetative bacteria and viruses are susceptible to UVGI. So just keep that in mind. So if you see, if you have UVGI irradiation in a, let's say, drain pan, you'll find that after 10 hours exposure, it is like a clearer type of water. In the left side, it is a mucky water. Exposure to UVGI results in elimination of biofilms, formation on the cooling coil and the condensate drain. Elimination of biofilm on cooling coil fins results in better heat transfer and consequently energy savings. Resultant air circulation is conducive to occupants' well-being. Then we have got, this is the something that is already now in the market, UVGI in the ducts. UVGI placed in ductwork have been used to inactivate mycobacterium species and microorganisms. See, when the air is passing on the cooling coil, the time, it is you're shining that UVGI only on the cooling coil and the drain pan. The time for contact with the UVGI is very short. In the duct also, it can be very short. But then what you do is you have this in the actual, you can see this UVGI, it is kept in actually inside the duct so that the contact time is increased. So that's the way you put it in a duct, and there is a way in which the UVGI manufacturer has to calculate whether it is good enough to kill all the bacteria that is going to go over it. The residence time of the microbe under UVGI illumination is an important factor while considering UVGI design for the duct. So that brings us to the end of my presentation about the methods that are there to tackle the infection in healthcare spaces. Thank you. Hello.
Yes, sir.
I am through with my presentation.
Okay, thank you, sir. Rahul bhai,
Yes.
please check any question or any point in the audience. Just check it.
Yes, I was- if any question is,
I don't think there are any questions.
No question, Rahul bhai.
almost done from your side, sir. No any questions.
Okay.
Really amazing. Very needful presentation.
Okay. So are we through with this?
Sir, thank you very much, sir.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we,
Amit bhai, unmute yourself.
Yeah, Sri Balinga sir, thank you very much to organize this program. I am Amit Sanghvi of Program Chair, sir. Very many thanks from ISC all chapter, sir.
thank you
It's
very
our
much.
pleasure to organize this program, sir. Thank you very much, sir. It is
Thank
so
you.
interesting and very technical, sir. I'm half an hour I have gone through your program, sir, but it is very interesting, sir. Thanks, sir. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thank you very much. Okay. Bye.
Okay, sir.
Thank you.
Bye, sir.
Yeah.
Bye, sir. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Okay, sir.